Welcome to JK Tells a Story, where real-life dramas unfold. Sit back and enjoy today's tale. Sarah Mitchell flipped through the pages of the investigating officer's report looking for anything that might pique her interest. The facts of the case seemed pretty straightforward. A farmer named William Crawford who lived out on the highway to Austin, Texas had heard what sounded like a gunshot in an abandoned barn on his property. He went to investigate because he thought it might be a hunter and his property was posted with no hunting signs. When he entered the barn, he found the body of a woman lying in a pool of blood. He called 911 immediately. When officers and EMTs arrived on the scene, they found the woman dead from a single bullet wound to the heart. A note referred the reader to the attached report from the medical examiner for details. The victim's car was found parked outside the barn. Documents found in the woman's purse which had been left in the car showed that she was Linda Thompson, the wife of David Thompson, a financial consultant in Austin. The detectives who searched the scene found no signs of a struggle, nor were there any signs of a robbery. It did not appear that Mrs. Thompson's purse had been disturbed. Her wallet still contained $125 in cash. No murder weapon was found at the scene of the crime, however. A single 9mm shell casing was retrieved from the floor of the barn. They subsequently determined that Mrs. Thompson had been shot with a 9mm pistol at close range. The time of death was established at approximately 3 p.m. Idly, Sarah opened the medical examiner's report. Everything appeared routine to her until she spotted a photograph of the victim taken at the scene. Death from the bullet had been instantaneous and Sarah expected to see fear or perhaps pain on the woman's face. Instead, the expression frozen on the face of the corpse was one of complete and total astonishment. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. This could be the one, she thought. Sarah hit speed dial on her cell phone, and when the call was answered, she said, "Hey, Rebecca, it's your little sister calling." "Hey," came the voice on the other end. "I was hoping it was you. It's been a few days since I've heard from you. Sorry I didn't call sooner, but I've been busy with my project, and guess what? I may just have found what I'm looking for." With that, she began to describe the Thompson case, including what she learned from the investigating officer's report and the photo taken by the medical examiner. "Wait a minute, Sarah. How did you get hold of the investigators and the ME's report? Those are confidential documents." Sarah gave an embarrassed little laugh. "Well, I might have let the officer think that I was still writing for the True Crime Channel, and I might have hinted that he would make a good subject for an on-camera interview when the channel does a segment on the case." She paused and then laughed again. "You know how cops are always suckers for a little publicity," she said in a teasing voice. "You've never been able to get over the fact that I joined the Dallas police force," Rebecca retorted with good humor. "But I can tell you this. No flirty young writer would ever get confidential information out of me." The two sisters kidded each other a bit more, but then Rebecca asked, "So what's the next step in your plan to become America's next great nonfiction author?" "The next step," Sarah told her, "is to go down to Austin and get the husband to participate in my project." "And just how do you plan to do that?" her older sister asked skeptically. "Simple," Sarah replied. "I'll just go see him and ask him. In fact, I've got an appointment with him tomorrow." Immediately, Rebecca's voice took on a serious tone. "Listen, Sarah, I want you to be careful with this guy. You know as well as I do that when a wife gets murdered, the husband is usually the primary suspect. If this guy killed his wife, he could easily kill again to protect his secret." "Yes, ma'am. I promise to be careful," Sarah replied in a little girl's voice. Then she immediately reverted to her natural tone. "Seriously, Rebecca, I know you're right, but I'm a big girl now and I know how to handle myself. I definitely won't get into a position where I'm vulnerable." "Okay," Rebecca said reluctantly, "but please take this seriously. If anything were to happen to you, I don't think I could stand it." "I swear, Rebecca," Sarah replied solemnly, "and I promise that I'll call you regularly and keep you posted on how it's going. Just don't make me drive down from Dallas and haul your crazy but out of trouble," Rebecca threatened. The next morning, David was still fuming about the visit from the police detectives, but he composed himself because he had an appointment with a potential client. Given how slow things had been since the recession, he was eager for any new business he could get. When the doorbell rang, David was waiting in the entry hall and quickly let Sarah Callahan in. As he escorted her back to his home office suite, he took the time to assess what he hoped would be his next client. He guessed her to be about 30, the same age as Linda, he thought. She had brown hair cut stylishly short and what appeared to be a slim, attractive figure under the business suit she wore. After they settled respectively into the sofa and chair on one side of his office, David poured them both a cup of coffee. He liked to make his clients as comfortable as possible before they began to discuss their financial goals. "Well, Miss Callahan," he said, settling back in his chair with his own cup, "tell me about your financial situation and what you're hoping to accomplish." Sarah took a sip of her coffee and then set the cup down carefully. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, I need to be honest with you about why I'm here. I'm not looking for financial advice." David's face took on a puzzled expression. "I'm afraid I don't understand. When you called yesterday, you said you needed to meet with me about a financial matter." "Well, it is a financial matter," Sarah said with a slight smile, "but not in the way you think. You see, I'm a writer working on a true crime book, and I'd like to write about your wife's case." The coffee cup froze halfway to David's lips. For a moment he just stared at her, and then he slowly set the cup down. "You want to write about Linda's murder? I know this must be difficult for you," Sarah said gently, "but I think your wife's case has the elements that could make for a compelling book. The circumstances are unusual, and there are aspects of the case that intrigue me." David's face hardened. "What aspects?" "Well, for one thing, there's the expression on your wife's face in the crime scene photos. She looked completely astonished, not afraid. That suggests she knew her killer, that she was shocked to see that person there." David leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face. "How did you see crime scene photos? Those aren't public record." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I have sources in law enforcement who sometimes share information with me for my writing." "You mean you tricked some cop into giving you confidential files?" "I prefer to think of it as investigative journalism," Sarah said with a weak smile. David was quiet for a long moment, just looking at her. Finally he said, "What exactly are you asking of me?" "I'd like your permission to write about the case, and I'd like your cooperation. I want to understand Linda as a person, your relationship with her, what might have led to this tragedy. I think if we work together, we might be able to help the police find her killer." "The police seem to think I'm her killer," David said bitterly. "Are you?" Sarah asked quietly. David's eyes flashed with anger. "No, I am not. I loved my wife, Miss Callahan. I would never have hurt her." Sarah studied his face carefully. After a moment she nodded. "I believe you, and that's exactly why I think this case deserves to be written about. If you didn't kill Linda, then someone else did, and they're still out there." David was quiet for a long time, apparently weighing her words. Finally he said, "What would this cooperation involve?" "Interviews mostly. I want to talk to you about Linda, about your marriage, about that day. I might want to visit the crime scene, talk to people who knew you both. I'd need your help to understand the real story. And what do I get out of this? Hopefully the truth. And maybe justice for Linda." David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his backyard. "The police already have their minds made up about me. They're not looking for anyone else. Then maybe it's time someone else started looking." David turned back to face her. "You really think you can find Linda's killer?" "I think I can try. But I'll need your help." David studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Miss Callahan. I'll help you. But I have one condition." "What's that?" "If at any point you decide you think I'm guilty, you tell me to my face. Don't go writing some book that paints me as a murderer without giving me a chance to defend myself." "Fair enough," Sarah agreed. "And please call me Sarah." "Sarah," David said, extending his hand. "I'm David, and I hope you find what you're looking for." As they shook hands, Sarah felt a small thrill of excitement. She was finally getting the break she needed for her book. What she didn't expect was the slight flutter in her chest when David smiled at her. "When would you like to start?" David asked. "How about right now?" David smiled. "All right, but first let me ask you something. What made you think Linda's case was worth writing about? There are murders every day. What was special about this one?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "Most murders happen for pretty predictable reasons: money, passion, drugs. But this one felt different. A woman calls her husband to meet her at an abandoned barn to show him some kind of opportunity, then ends up dead. What was the opportunity? Why was she there? And that look on her face." Sarah paused. "I've seen a lot of crime scene photos, David. Fear, anger, pain, those are normal. But astonishment? That's something else entirely." David nodded slowly. "You're right about one thing. Linda wasn't easily surprised. She was a very practical woman. For her to look that shocked..." He trailed off, lost in thought. "Tell me about her," Sarah said gently. David sat back down, his hands clasped together. "Linda was beautiful, of course. But more than that, she was smart. Really smart. She had a way of seeing through people, you know? She could size someone up in about 5 minutes and know exactly what they were about." "How did you meet?" A small smile crossed David's face. "At a charity auction about 2 years ago. She was there with some friends and I was there because my business partner dragged me along. I saw her from across the room and knew I had to meet her. Took me 3 tries to work up the courage to ask her to dance." "What was she like as a wife?" David's expression grew more serious. "Devoted, I thought. We didn't have a perfect marriage, nobody does, but we were happy. At least I thought we were." His voice grew quieter. "Maybe I didn't know her as well as I thought I did." "What do you mean?" "The opportunity she mentioned on the phone. I've been thinking about it constantly since she died, and I can't figure out what it could have been. Linda wasn't the type to be secretive, especially about business opportunities. We discussed everything." Sarah leaned forward. "Could it have been related to her own work? What did she do?" "She worked part-time for an interior design firm, but it was more of a hobby than a career. She didn't need the money. My business was doing well enough. She just enjoyed the work." "Any problems with clients? Disputes over payments or designs?" David shook his head. "Nothing like that. Her clients loved her. She had a gift for making spaces feel warm and inviting." Sarah made a note in her notebook. "What about friends? Who was she close to?" Susan Jackson was probably her best friend. They met through the design firm. Linda also had a book club and she was active in a few charities. David paused. "The police have already talked to all of them. Nobody had any idea what Linda might have been doing at that barn." "What about the barn itself? Had Linda ever mentioned it before?" "Never. I don't think she'd ever been out to Crawford's place before that day. I certainly hadn't." Sarah looked up from her notes. "David, I have to ask this. Is there any chance Linda was having an affair?" David's face flushed with anger. "Absolutely not. Linda wasn't that type of woman. I'm sorry, but I had to ask. It's one of the most common motives for..." "Well, you can cross that off your list," David said firmly. "Linda loved me and I loved her. Whatever happened to her, it wasn't about another man." Sarah nodded, making another note. She could see the pain in David's eyes when he talked about Linda, and she found herself believing his protestations of innocence. Either he was telling the truth or he was the best actor she'd ever seen. "Tell me about that day," she said gently. "Walk me through everything from the beginning." David took a deep breath. "I was here in the office working on a client presentation. Linda called around 1:30. She seemed excited, almost breathless. She said she had something incredible to show me and asked if I could meet her at the old barn on Crawford's place at 2 o'clock. Did she say how she knew about the barn?" "No, and I should have asked. But she sounded so excited and she said it was important." David's voice grew regretful. "I should have insisted she tell me more over the phone." "What happened next?" I left here around 1:45 planning to drive out there. It's about a 20-minute drive. But about halfway there my left rear tire blew out. I pulled over and changed it, but the spare was in bad shape too. Barely held enough air to get me home. How long did that take? Nearly an hour. By the time I got the spare on and drove back home, it was almost 3:30. I was filthy and sweaty, and I had a 4 o'clock appointment with a very important client. I figured whatever Linda wanted to show me could wait until evening. Sarah noticed the guilt in his voice. You feel responsible. Of course I do. If I'd made it out there, maybe I could have prevented it. Or maybe I'd be dead too. He looked at her with haunted eyes. I replay that day over and over in my mind. What if I'd left earlier? What if I'd insisted she tell me what it was about? What if I'd called AAA? David, you can't blame yourself for having a flat tire. Can't I? Linda needed me and I wasn't there for her. Sarah felt her chest tighten at the pain in his voice. Without thinking, she reached over and placed her hand on his arm. Her death wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known what was going to happen. David looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. For a moment they just looked at each other, and Sarah felt that flutter in her chest again. There was something about this man that called to her something beyond just professional interest. She pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of the inappropriateness of touching him. I'm sorry. I can see how much you loved her. I did love her, David said quietly. That's why I want to find out who did this to her. If your book can help do that, then I'm all for it. Sarah nodded, trying to refocus on her professional purpose. David, there's one other thing I need to ask about. You mentioned that Linda had money from her previous marriage. How was that handled financially between you two? We have a prenuptial agreement, David said matter-of-factly. Linda had substantial assets from her first marriage, and she wanted to keep them separate. It was her idea, actually. She said she'd been burned before and wanted protection. I understood completely. We agreed to sign a prenuptial agreement covering those assets in the event of a divorce. A lot of women would feel threatened by that suggestion, but she understood immediately that I was trying to protect both of us. He slumped back in his seat. I'll never find another one like her. I'd like to see the barn where it happened. Would you be willing to take me there? Sarah asked. David hesitated. I've never actually been there. The police wouldn't let me near the crime scene. Then maybe it's time we both saw it. If we're going to understand what happened to Linda, we need to see where it happened. David considered this. All right, but I warn you, it might be difficult for me. I understand. We can go whenever you're ready. David glanced at his watch. I don't have any more appointments today. We could go now if you want. The drive out to Crawford's farm took them west of Austin into the rolling Texas hill country. David was quiet for most of the trip, and Sarah used the time to study his profile. He had strong features, a firm jaw, intelligent eyes, graying temples that made him look distinguished. She could see why Linda had been attracted to him. There it is, David said, pointing to a weathered mailbox marked Crawford. He turned down a gravel driveway that led to a modest farmhouse. Beyond the house, Sarah could see several outbuildings, including an old red barn that had seen better days. David parked near the farmhouse, and they both got out. An elderly man emerged from the front porch. William Crawford, Sarah assumed. You folks lost, Crawford called out. Mr. Crawford? I'm David Thompson. This was my wife who... David's voice trailed off. Crawford's expression softened. Oh, son, I'm sorry for your loss. Terrible thing that happened here. Just terrible. This is Sarah Callahan, David said. She's a writer working on a book about Linda's case. We were wondering if we could take a look at the barn. Crawford nodded. Course you can. Police finished with it last week, gave me the okay to clean it up. Haven't had the heart to go in there yet, though. He gestured toward the barn. Y'all go on ahead. I'll be up at the house if you need anything. David and Sarah walked slowly toward the barn. The building was old but solid, with large doors that stood slightly ajar. David stopped about 10 feet from the entrance. "I can't," he said quietly. "I thought I could, but I can't." Sarah put her hand on his arm again. "It's okay. Why don't you wait here? I'll just take a quick look and tell you what I see." David nodded gratefully and Sarah approached the barn alone. She pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The interior was dim lit only by sunlight streaming through gaps in the boards. The floor was covered with old straw and she could see a dark stain near the center of the space where Linda had died. She stood there for several minutes trying to imagine what had happened. Linda had come here to show David some kind of opportunity. But what? And why here in this abandoned barn? Sarah walked slowly around the space looking for anything the police might have missed. In one corner she found some old farm equipment, a rusted plow, some harnesses, a few tools. Nothing that would constitute an opportunity. She was about to leave when something caught her eye. On one of the wooden support posts carved into the wood were the initials LW. Below them were the initials MW, and a heart. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. LW, could that stand for Linda Webb? And who was MW? She took out her phone and snapped a photo of the carved initials, then hurried back outside to where David was waiting. "Find anything?" he asked. Sarah hesitated. The initials might mean nothing, but they could also be a clue. However, sharing them with David might not be wise if they pointed to Linda having some kind of past relationship. "Nothing obvious," she said. "Just an old barn. But being here helps me understand the setting." David nodded. "Can we go now? This place gives me the creeps." During the drive back to Austin, Sarah found herself stealing glances at David. He was clearly struggling with being at the scene of his wife's death, and her heart went out to him. But she also couldn't get those initials out of her mind. If Linda had been to this barn before, it changed everything. "David," she said carefully. "What was Linda's maiden name?" "Webb," he said. "Linda Webb." "Why?" Sarah's heart sank. The initials did match. "Just making sure I have all the facts right for the book." When they arrived back at David's house, he invited her in for coffee again. As they sat in his office, Sarah struggled with whether to tell him about the initials. If Linda had been to the barn before, if she had some kind of relationship with someone whose initials were MW, it could be crucial to solving the case. But it would also devastate David. "David," she said finally, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from his coffee cup and she could see the wariness in his eyes. "I did find something at the barn. There were some initials carved into one of the posts. LW and MW with a heart between them." David's face went very still. "LW could be Linda Webb." "Yes." "And MW? I don't know. Do you know anyone with those initials?" David was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with pain. "No," he said quietly. "I don't know anyone with those initials." But Sarah could tell he was lying. "David, if Linda had some kind of past relationship, it could be important to finding her killer. You have to tell me what you know." "I don't know anything," David said firmly. "Maybe the initials have nothing to do with Linda. Maybe they've been there for years." Sarah studied his face. She could see the hurt there, the betrayal, but also something else. Fear? "David, what are you afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of anything. I just don't want to see my wife's memory destroyed by some wild theory about an affair that probably never happened." Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. She could push David for information he clearly didn't want to give, or she could back off and try to find out about MW on her own. Given how fragile David seemed at the moment, she decided to let it go for now. "You're right," she said. "The initials could have been there for years. I shouldn't jump to conclusions." David looked relieved. "Thank you for understanding." They talked for another hour about Linda's friends and family, but Sarah could tell David's heart wasn't in it anymore. The discovery at the barn had shaken him badly. When she finally left his house, Sarah sat in her car for several minutes thinking. Either David really didn't know about Linda's possible past relationship, or he was protecting someone. Or maybe he was protecting himself. One thing was certain. The case was more complicated than it had first appeared. And Sarah was beginning to realize that her feelings toward David were also more complicated than she had expected. She pulled out her phone and called Rebecca. "How did it go?" her sister asked immediately. "Interesting," Sarah said. "And confusing. Rebecca, I think I might be in over my head with this one." "What happened?" Sarah told her about the interview with David, the visit to the barn, and the carved initials. "He's either innocent and heartbroken or he's a really good actor. But either way, I think his wife was keeping secrets. Sarah, I'm worried about you. This guy could be dangerous." "I don't think he is," Sarah said, but even as she said it, she wondered if her judgment was being clouded by her growing attraction to David. "Promise me you'll be careful. And promise me you won't meet with him alone again." "I promise," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure she meant it. That evening, when she called her sister, Sarah was in a contemplative mood. "I know I'm supposed to maintain a level of detachment," she said, "but I can't help liking the guy. He just doesn't seem like the sort of person who would murder his wife." Rebecca's voice took on a tone that sounded like a professor at a lecture. "Sarah, do you know what a sociopath is?" she asked. "Of course I do," Sarah responded sharply. "And David is not a sociopath. I think he's an intelligent, caring individual who suffered a terrible loss and is now being unfairly accused. He certainly doesn't seem to be delusional in any way." "None of that means he's not a sociopath," Rebecca retorted. "Listen to some of the characteristics commonly observed in sociopaths, and I'm quoting now. Superficial charm and good intelligence, absence of signs of irrational thinking, unreliability, untruthfulness and insincerity, lack of remorse and shame, antisocial behavior." The list goes on. "Where did you get all that stuff?" Sarah demanded. "It comes straight out of The Mask of Sanity by Hervey Cleckley. It's considered one of the foremost clinical descriptions of psychopathic and sociopathic behavior," Rebecca said firmly. "Well, I'm not convinced," Sarah said fiercely. "In the first place, a lot of those traits could be used to describe lots of people who are perfectly sane. Second, the absence of signs of irrational behavior is hardly proof that he's a sociopath. And finally, you don't know that some of those other characteristics like untruthfulness and antisocial behavior apply to David." "Well, I'm not making accusations here," Rebecca replied. "I just want you to keep your guard up with this guy. If he is a sociopath, and I'm not saying that he is, just that he might be, then he can be very charming and manipulative. All I'm saying is keep your eyes open and don't take any risks. Okay?" "All right, sis, all right," Sarah sighed. "I'll be careful. You've always watched out for me. I won't do anything stupid." Sarah was just getting ready to leave for David's home the next afternoon when her cell phone rang. When she checked the display, she was surprised to see it was Rebecca calling again. "I'm so glad I caught you," Rebecca said breathlessly. "In all our talk last night about sociopaths, I completely overlooked something else you said. Didn't you tell me that David and Linda had a prenuptial agreement?" "That's right," Sarah said. "But what's so important about that? Did he tell you which one of them wanted the prenup?" Rebecca asked eagerly. "I'm not sure," Sarah replied. "But I don't know why it matters." "Don't you see?" Rebecca said. "That's the motive for the murder. Think about it. David's business is failing and he needs an infusion of capital. She has money from her ex-husband, but David can't get at it by divorcing her because she has that prenup in place. But in the case of her death, the surviving spouse inherits everything. Follow the money, Sarah. It's the oldest motive in the books." When Sarah said nothing, Rebecca spoke up impatiently. "Well, what do you think, Sarah?" "I never thought about the implications of their having a prenup," Sarah said quietly. "I'll definitely want to look into that." Then, speaking hurriedly, she went on. "Listen, sis, I'm running late. I'll give you a call later and let you know what I find out. Just stay on your toes," Rebecca said just before Sarah hung up. As she pulled out in her car to head for David's home, Sarah's mind was in a whirl. Could he really be the murderer, she wondered? Could this all be nothing more than a case of greed? As she drove, she reminded herself that the two murderers in Capote's book were also mere thieves, and that didn't lessen the impact of the book in any way. But she was surprised at how disappointed she felt at the idea that David might turn out to be the killer. He just doesn't seem like the type, she thought sadly. David was working on a spreadsheet when Sarah finally arrived. As she came into his office, he noticed the expression on her face and knew immediately that something was wrong. "What is it, Sarah? What's happened?" Her face had a curious expression, and she remained standing rather than taking a seat on the sofa. Finally, she took a deep breath as though steeling herself for something unpleasant and spoke. "I don't know whether you realized it or not, but yesterday you told me something that could provide a possible motive for murder." When David looked at her questioningly, she plunged ahead. "You told me that you and Linda had a prenuptial agreement that kept her premarital assets separate. As a result, the only way you could have access to her funds to bail out your business would be to inherit them in the case of her death." David stared at her for a long moment, and as she carefully watched him, Sarah realized she was holding her breath. Then he suddenly burst into laughter. "Is that what's troubling you? There was no problem getting extra cash. Linda was going to make a loan from her funds to my business to tide me over. We even had a contract drawn up specifying all the terms and conditions. I'm not sure where the contract is now, but I could probably find it if it would make you feel better." He paused and then went on more quietly. "We were going to sign the contract the same night she was murdered, but we never got the chance." He sat down heavily on the office couch, apparently remembering his last interaction with his wife. Sarah sat down beside him, obviously relieved that there was such a simple explanation to the situation. "I'm sorry, David. I should have known that things weren't the way they looked. It's just that I'm trying so hard to examine all possibilities, and this whole case is so puzzling." He looked at her understandingly. "No, don't apologize. You're trying to do your job, and that means exploring every possible avenue. I'm just flattered that you didn't want to find me guilty." She gave him an embarrassed little smile. He smiled back and then stood up abruptly. "Listen, having to deal with all this stuff is making me crazy. Let's not spend any more time on this today. I don't have any appointments this afternoon, and I'm sick of being cooped up inside. Now that spring is here, let's go out and enjoy the good weather and put all this police stuff aside for a while." "That sounds good," Sarah said, immediately allowing David to lead her out to his car. "Where are we going?" she asked, but all he would do was smile and tell her to be patient. For one nervous moment, Sarah wondered if he was going to take her out west of Austin to the farm where Linda had died, but instead he headed toward the central part of the city. Eventually he turned onto Barton Springs Road and drove until they reached Zilker Botanical Garden. She looked at him curiously. "I have to admit, this is not what I was expecting," Sarah told him. "You are an unusual man. Every time I think I understand you, you surprise me." After they had entered through the gates, David led Sarah around to the right, exploring the different gardens along the winding paths. They ended up spending the entire afternoon wandering through the many gardens and exhibits. When they finally made it to the Oriental Garden, David led Sarah to a bench beside a pond surrounded by bamboo, and the two sat there enjoying the peacefulness of the setting. "I like to come to this place when I need to think," he told her with a smile. By the time they had returned to his car, the shadows were lengthening, and when David saw the time, he apologized to Sarah for keeping her out so long. "This has been a wonderful day, David," she quickly said. "It seems like I never have a chance to get away. This is the first time I've been able to forget everything else and just enjoy myself." He hesitated a moment and then asked her if she had any commitments for the evening. When she replied that she didn't, he continued, "I don't know about you, but after all this walking, I'm starving. Would you have dinner with me?" Then before she could answer, he added, "But with one condition, that we don't talk about crime or Linda or anything like that." Sarah smiled and readily agreed. They left the botanical garden and David drove downtown along Lady Bird Lake until they came to the Oasis, the restaurant built on a bluff overlooking the lake. The evening was warm enough that they took a table out on the deck. David ordered a bottle of wine and the conversation over dinner flowed easily. At first, they discussed what they had liked in the botanical garden, then David went on to tell Sarah about other sites and activities in Austin that she might enjoy. Afterward, the conversation drifted to other topics and David entertained her with humorous stories about his college years at UT and his adventures starting his own business. By the time they finished and were walking back to the car, the temperature had dipped enough that David offered his suit jacket, and when she nodded gratefully, he slipped it over Sarah's shoulders. Once they got back to the car, David drove them across the river on South First Street and continued until they hit Mopac. Then he turned back north and drove them across the Pennybacker Bridge so she could have a good view of the city lights. When they finally returned to David's home office, he invited her in for a cup of coffee, and still chilly from the night air, she gratefully accepted. As they sat sipping the brew, an embarrassed look came over David's face. When Sarah noticed his expression, she asked him what was wrong. "You must think I'm the world's biggest egomaniac," he said apologetically. "I just realized that I spent the entire evening talking about myself." No, I don't mind," she laughed. "I enjoyed learning more about you. Besides, isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Interrogate the subject of my book?" He smiled. "Well, now it's my turn to interrogate you, Miss Callahan. I'd like to know something about your history." She attempted to wave his interest off. "There's really not much to tell about me. I'm just one of those people who focus so heavily on my work that it doesn't leave much time in my life for anything else." "Well, do you have any brothers or sisters?" he asked. "Just one sister, Rebecca, who lives in Dallas. She's a detective on the police force." "Really?" David replied. "Isn't that interesting? Both of you found careers in different aspects of criminal justice. I know she's a policewoman and you're a crime writer, but your focus is still the same. Is that a coincidence?" The smile left Sarah's face. "Well, Rebecca is my older sister, so it's not so odd that I'd be influenced by her." David pressed on. "But there must be more to it than that. What is it that drove both of you to pursue the criminal element? Was your father a policeman?" Sarah sat there silent and motionless, almost as if she were holding her breath, and her face turned pale. Then, to David's astonishment, her eyes closed and huge tears began to run down her cheeks. She put her hands to her face and began to sob like a heartbroken child. David was stunned, unsure of what to do. He sat there leaning forward in his chair uncertainly. After a few moments, Sarah began to speak in a halting voice through her sobs. "I was in the 7th grade when it happened. A friend's mother gave me a ride from school, and when I got home, the side door we always used was wide open. That wasn't normal, but I didn't think much about it. When I went in, I yelled to Mama that I was home, but she didn't answer. I yelled again, and when there was still no answer, I began to get worried. I walked through the living room and saw the floor lamp knocked over and the furniture out of place. Then I saw blood on the floor, and I remember I began to tremble all over. I don't know why, but I tiptoed back to my parents' bedroom. When I peeked in the door, I saw her foot sticking out from the other side of the bed." David's face had gone pale as he listened, but Sarah didn't notice because her eyes remained squeezed shut. It was obvious she was remembering every detail of the horrible scene. "When I went over to look at her, I saw that her clothes had been torn from her. I remember especially that her undergarments were torn. But what I remember most was the blood everywhere. After he was done with the assault, he had shot her in the stomach. I screamed her name over and over again, tugging on her hand, trying to get her to stand up. Rebecca always got home later than me, and she must have heard me because she came running into the room. She started crying too, but she was older and stronger than me. She pulled me out of the bedroom and back into the living room. Then she called 911 and held me until the police arrived." Now David moved to her side and put his arm around her as she wept. "Oh God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how horrible that must have been for you." Sarah looked up at him with red, haunted eyes. "That wasn't the end of it. When Daddy came home, he got hysterical. They'd covered Mama up with a sheet, but he ripped it off and screamed when he saw what that monster had done to her. The police had to physically restrain him. In his agony, Daddy loved us. He was always watching out for us, always trying to protect us." She began to sob again. But Mama was the light of his life, and to find her like that was more than he could bear. So later, after Rebecca and I had gone to the neighbors to spend the night, he put a gun to his head and ended his own life. "Oh my God!" David gasped. "When they thought I couldn't hear them, I've heard people say that my daddy was selfish. They said he had a responsibility to Rebecca and me and that he put his own grief ahead of that. But I know that's not true. I know that the man who killed my mama killed my daddy too, just as surely as if he'd been the one to pull the trigger." She began to weep again, and David held her, shaken by her awful story. After a few minutes, she raised her eyes and looked at him. "We didn't have any other family to live with. Our grandparents had died, and Mama and Daddy didn't have any brothers or sisters. The authorities wanted to put us in a foster home, but Rebecca was 18 by then, and she fought them. She finally became my legal guardian and raised me. Things were tight, but we had the money from Daddy's life insurance and Social Security, and we made it. Anyway, Rebecca decided right away that she was going to become a policewoman. I'm not as brave as she is, so I didn't follow her, but I was still fixated on criminals one way or another. Both of us wanted to try to prevent something like that from happening to somebody else." With that, she buried her head in David's shoulder and wept some more. David held her lightly, rubbing her back the way a parent would soothe a grieving child. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I don't know what to say," he told her quietly. Then after a few minutes he whispered, "I guess both of us have lost someone we love to violence." Startled, she pulled back to stare at him and thought she saw a reflection of her own grief mirrored in his face. In her pain, she had completely forgotten about the fact that he had just lost his wife. She pulled him tightly back to her, and the two of them clung to each other like the lost souls they were. After some time, both of them calmed down. Sarah pulled back far enough to gaze into David's eyes, then she leaned forward to kiss him gently on the lips. He returned the kiss with warmth and gratitude. Again she pulled back to look at him, and this time he saw a look of determination in her eyes. She leaned in again, but this time her kiss was full of promise. The powerful emotions she had experienced were now transformed into passion, and her lips parted so her tongue could probe his. Almost instantly the heat between them blazed up, and they were locked in a passionate embrace like lovers long separated from one another. Finally David wrenched himself away and held her at arm's length. "Are you sure, Sarah?" he asked. Without hesitation she replied, "I'm as sure as anything in my life." With that, he pulled her back into his embrace and began kissing her. Abruptly, he swept her up in his arms and carried her back to the master bedroom, laying her on her back and stretching out beside her. Between kisses, they began to fumble at one another's clothing, desperate to remove all barriers between them. But as he helped her with her blouse, David thought he detected some hesitation in her movements, and when he ran his hand over her stomach, he could feel the tension in her muscles. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked anxiously. "Is something wrong? Do you want me to stop?" He pulled his hand away, but she grabbed it and brought it back to her. "No, don't stop," she said. "It's just that, well, I've never done this before." Then she looked away in embarrassment. As he stared at her in astonishment after a second, he leaned over and kissed her gently. "It's all right," he said soothingly. "I know just what to do." They came together with tenderness and care. After their union was complete, she lay beside him, feeling a peace she had never known. David slipped out of bed and went into the bathroom. He returned a minute later with a warm washcloth and a towel, which he handed to Sarah. After she'd finished, he slipped into bed beside her and pulled the covers over the two of them. In minutes, they were both asleep. When the morning sun woke him, David rolled over to look at his alarm clock and was startled to see that it was an hour past his normal time to get up. Then he remembered what had happened the night before and spun around to look for Sarah, but she wasn't there. He glanced around the room, then got up to check in the bathroom, but she was nowhere to be found. When he returned to the bed, however, he spotted a note on the pillow she had used. "Hey, sleepyhead. I had an appointment first thing, so I let myself out. Sarah. P.S. I'll call you. P.P.S. You snore. P.P.P.S. Last night was wonderful." Later that morning, after her early appointment, Sarah called Rebecca while driving back to her hotel. Hey Rebecca. Sorry I didn't call you last night. I meant to after I got back to my hotel, but it was pretty late. Where were you so late? Rebecca asked suspiciously. Well, something happened, Sarah said hesitantly. What did you do, Sarah? Oh my God, you slept with him. I can hear it in your voice. Damn it, I never could keep secrets from you. It's like you read my mind sometimes. Are you crazy? I can't believe you let him seduce you. Do you know what a risk you were taking? He could have killed you just like that beast killed Mom. No, Rebecca, no. It wasn't like that at all. He didn't seduce me. If anything, I seduced him. We were talking about Mama. You told him about her? Why would you do that, Sarah? We just got to talking about our pasts and suddenly it all came spilling out. I was crying and he held me and tried to comfort me. After I calmed down, I realized that his wife had been murdered just like Mama. Then I was trying to comfort him and somehow it all got intense and now I'm not a virgin anymore. So he got you in a vulnerable emotional state and then took advantage of your weakness? No, it was nothing like that. He was gentle and considerate and loving. I felt completely safe. I don't think he's even capable of violence. Listen to me, Sarah Mitchell. I've been thinking more about what you told me yesterday about that prenup, and I'm even more worried now. That gives him a clear financial motive for murder. What's more, he has every reason to romance you because you're writing a book that could support his innocence. Of course he wants you to like him. I can see what you're saying, but you just don't know him like I do. Anyway, before you start another lecture, I promise that I'll be careful and I'll do a better job of keeping in touch. Pinky promise, sis. All right, Rebecca, but don't forget it. If anything happened to you, I don't know what I'd do. Hey, I feel the same way about you. Hey, I feel the same way about you. The call came in mid-morning and David answered quickly, hoping that it might be a new client. It wasn't. Instead, a muffled voice inquired, "Is this David Thompson?" "Yes, I'm David Thompson." "The David Thompson that was married to Linda Thompson?" "Yes. What's this about?" "You think your wife was a saint, but she was really just a common whore." "What the hell? I don't know who you are, but you have no right to insult my late wife." "It's no insult to call a spade, Thompson. You don't believe me? Well, you should. Because she was sleeping with James Harrison right under your nose." "James Harrison? Linda didn't even know him, and she would never do anything like that anyway. If you don't believe me, why don't you ask one of her friends? I'll bet they all knew. Hell, I bet half of them were helping her hide it from you. Listen, whoever you are, while you're sitting around mourning for her, they're probably all laughing at you behind your back." Who the hell are you?" David yelled, but the line had already gone dead. A few minutes later, David was in his car headed for the home of Jared and Susan Jackson. David and Linda often socialized with the Jacksons, and Susan was probably Linda's best friend. When David rang the doorbell, Susan answered. "Oh, David, you startled me. I wasn't expecting you. If you're looking for Jared, he's at work," she said uneasily. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you, Susan. Do you mind if I come in for a few minutes?" he asked coldly. Of course, she said hastily. "Listen, I'm so sorry we haven't been by to see you since the funeral. It's been crazy around here and we've had so much to do." He held his hand up to halt her babbling. Knowing Susan and how close she was to Linda, David felt certain that she would try to protect her friend if he asked her a simple yes or no question. So he decided to take a more aggressive approach. He crossed his arms and stared at her sternly. "How long did you know about Linda and James Harrison?" he demanded. He watched her face closely so he saw her eyes widen in surprise. She stood there silently for a long moment, obviously groping for the right thing to say. That told him all he needed to know. The anonymous caller had been telling the truth. All the adrenaline that had been pumping through him ever since the phone call seemed to flow out of him, and he sank down in the chair behind him, putting his head in his hands. What about Linda and James? He heard Susan say weakly. He looked up at her with wounded eyes. Please don't lie to me, Susan. It's much too late for that, he said. Susan sat down across from him and nervously played with her hands as she stared at him. David, I don't know what to say, she said in a pleading voice. Just answer my question. How long was it going on? Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route, but finding none, she spread her hands helplessly and answered, I don't know. Maybe 6 months or so. 6 months. David thundered, and she shrank back at his anger. How could you not say anything? I tried to warn her, David, Susan protested. I told her she was playing with fire, but she wouldn't listen. Suddenly David remembered something else the anonymous caller had said and asked, Who else knew? I guess after a while almost all of us, Susan said reluctantly. Linda hardly even tried to hide it. Some of us even wondered if you knew and it was some kind of arrangement you had. My God, you know me better than that, David yelled angrily. I could never stand for something like that. Susan sat white-faced in the chair, retreating as far away from David as she could get. After a few moments he regained his composure and his face took on a sad expression. Why didn't you tell me, Susan? 6 months. Why didn't you let me know? She held her hands out in supplication. I couldn't, David. She was my friend. I just couldn't. He stood up and stared at her coldly. I thought you were my friend too. Thanks for nothing. Then he walked to the door and drove off, leaving a shaken Susan to reach for the phone to call her friends. Late that afternoon, Sarah pulled up to David's home and rang his doorbell. When he opened the door, she gasped in surprise. He was standing there holding a bag of frozen peas over his eye. Oh my gosh, David, what happened? I got into a fight, he said as he ushered her into his office. You got into a fight? Sarah asked in disbelief. That doesn't sound like you. David proceeded to recount the whole story from the anonymous phone call through his encounter with Susan Jackson. After she confirmed everything, I drove straight over to where Harrison has an office. The creep inherited a fortune when his wife died of cancer, and now he spends most of his time managing his investments. When I walked in, he was meeting with some guy who works for him, but I interrupted them. When I told him who I was, he was startled at first, but then he got a sneer on his face. I couldn't stand it and threw a punch at him. David tried to smile, but the motion hurt his eye and he gave an involuntary groan. Who knew that his assistant was a martial arts expert? Anyway, they dragged me out of the office and Harrison threatened to call the cops if I ever came back. Sarah was clearly taken aback. David, you committed assault and battery. He can have you arrested if he wants to press charges. I doubt if he wants to do that, considering why I went after him in the first place. Besides, I'm the one who was battered, not him. Sarah looked at him disapprovingly. For a guy who's just started a brawl, you don't sound very contrite. His expression darkened noticeably. I don't even know how I'm supposed to feel. I've been mourning the death of my wife all this time, and now I find out she was carrying on an affair behind my back. How do I feel? I'm angry, hurt, and confused, and I'm definitely not contrite about going after the creep she was cheating with. Sarah flinched at the venom in his voice, and David immediately looked contrite. I'm sorry, Sarah. I shouldn't be taking this out on you. It's just that I feel like such a fool. Everyone knew about Linda's affair except me. I feel like the whole world was laughing at me behind my back. Sarah felt a surge of sympathy for him. David, you're not a fool. You're a trusting husband who believed in his wife. There's nothing wrong with that. David looked at her with grateful eyes. Thank you for saying that. I don't know what I'd do without you right now. You don't have to do this alone, Sarah said, moving closer to him on the couch. Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I found when I was going through Linda's things after you left this morning. He got up and retrieved a manila folder from his desk. I found Linda's address book and I looked through it more carefully. There's an entry for someone called Webb M. with a phone number. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. M. Webb? Could that be connected to the initials we found at the barn? I think so. I called the number. What happened? A man answered. I told him I was Linda's husband and that I'd found his name in her address book. He seemed to know about Linda's death, but when I asked if he'd meet with me, he refused. He said some things were better left buried. That's exactly what someone would say if they had something to hide, Sarah said. David, I think we need to find out more about this M. Webb person. They spent the next hour researching the phone number and discovered that it belonged to someone named Marcus Webb, who lived in a rundown apartment complex on the east side of Austin. Should we try to talk to him? Sarah asked. David hesitated. If this guy was involved with Linda somehow, he could be dangerous. That's why we'll be careful. But David, this could be the break we need. When they drove to the apartment complex, they found it to be in a seedy part of town. Sarah approached a woman sitting on a bench near the building entrance. Excuse me, I'm looking for Marcus Webb. Do you know if he lives here? The woman looked at her suspiciously. Who's asking? My name is Sarah. I'm a friend of Linda's. Linda Thompson. The woman's expression changed. Oh, honey, you didn't hear? Linda's dead. Somebody shot her. I know. That's why I'm looking for Marcus. Linda was a friend of mine, and I wanted to talk to him about her. The woman shook her head sadly. Marcus took it real hard when he heard about Linda. He's been acting crazy ever since. Crazy how? Drinking more than usual, talking about how it was all his fault. Yesterday I heard him yelling at someone on the phone, saying something about how it wasn't supposed to happen that way. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Do you know where Marcus is now? Haven't seen him since yesterday morning. His car's gone, so I figure he went somewhere. But honey, if you're smart, you'll stay away from Marcus Webb. That man's got a mean streak, especially when he's been drinking. When they took their findings to the police, the detectives were again dismissive. Mr. Thompson, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but what you've told us is interesting but not conclusive. The affair could have a perfectly innocent explanation for why your wife was at that barn. And a phone conversation with someone who claims to have known your wife doesn't prove anything. After they left the police station, both David and Sarah were discouraged. They're not going to help, David said. They've already made up their minds about me. Then we'll have to find the proof ourselves, Sarah said determinedly. That evening, as they sat in David's living room, Sarah could see that the day's revelations had taken a toll on him. His face was drawn, and there was a defeated look in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. David, I know today was difficult. Finding out about Linda's affair must have been devastating. It changes everything, he said quietly. All this time I've been mourning a woman I thought I knew, but it turns out I didn't know her at all. That doesn't mean she deserved to die. No, it doesn't. But it does mean that I might not have been the only one with a motive to kill her. Sarah nodded. James Harrison, this Marcus Webb person, either of them could have had reasons to want her dead. Or maybe Linda got herself involved in something dangerous and it caught up with her. As they talked, Sarah found herself studying David's face in the lamplight. The bruising around his eye made him look vulnerable, and she felt a fierce protectiveness toward him. David, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret last night? I mean, given everything that's happened today. David turned to look at her, his eyes intense. Sarah, last night was the first time since Linda died that I felt anything other than grief and confusion. You gave me something precious, hope that I might actually have a future beyond all this. Sarah felt her heart racing. I felt it too. Despite everything we've learned today, I still believe you're innocent. And I still care about you. David moved closer to her on the couch. Sarah, you have to know that you're taking a risk being here with me. The police still think I'm a murderer. And now we know that Linda was involved with some dangerous people. I'm not afraid of you, David. I'm more afraid of losing you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. David reached out and gently touched her face. How did I get so lucky to find you in the middle of all this nightmare? Sarah leaned into his touch. Maybe we found each other. This time when they came together, there was a desperation in their embrace that hadn't been there the night before. They were two people clinging to each other in the face of an uncertain future, finding solace in their connection while the world seemed to be falling apart around them. Later, as they lay together in David's bed, Sarah traced patterns on his chest with her finger. "What are we going to do?" she asked softly. "We're going to find the truth," David said with determination. "And we're going to clear my name so that we can have a real future together." "Promise me something," Sarah said. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what we discover about Linda, no matter how bad it gets, we'll face it together." David pulled her closer. "I promise. We're in this together now, Sarah. Whatever happens, we'll get through it." The next morning, David received another anonymous phone call. "Thompson, you've been asking questions about Linda. You need to stop." "Who is this?" David demanded. "Someone who knows what really happened to your wife. If you're smart, you'll leave it alone. If you know what happened, tell me. Meet me at the old Crawford farm tonight at midnight. Come alone, and don't bring the writer or anyone else. If you do, you'll never learn the truth." "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "Because if I wanted you dead, Thompson, you'd already be dead." The line went dead, leaving David staring at the phone in his hand. When Sarah arrived an hour later, he told her about the call. "David, you can't go. It's obviously a trap." "Maybe, but it might also be our only chance to find out what really happened to Linda. Then we'll call the police." "And tell them what? That I got another anonymous phone call? They've already made it clear they're not going to help." Sarah paced around the room, clearly agitated. "David, I have a bad feeling about this. What if it's the real killer trying to eliminate you? Then at least you'll know I was innocent." "That's not funny." David took her hands in his. "Sarah, I have to do this. I can't live the rest of my life under suspicion for a crime I didn't commit. If there's a chance to clear my name, I have to take it." "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." The caller specifically said to come alone. "David, I'm not letting you walk into danger by yourself." "Sarah, please. I need to know that you're safe. If something happens to me, at least you can tell the police what you know." Sarah looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I can't lose you, David. Not now." He pulled her into his arms. "You won't lose me. I promise I'll be careful." "How can you promise that when you don't know what you're walking into?" "Because I have something to live for now," he said, kissing her gently. "I have you." That evening, as David prepared to leave for the farm, Sarah made one last desperate attempt to dissuade him. "Please don't do this," she said. "We'll find another way." "There is no other way, Sarah. This is my only chance." As he kissed her goodbye, neither of them knew that it would be the beginning of the most dangerous night of their lives. David drove out to the Crawford farm with his heart pounding. The familiar route that had once been just a drive to see a crime scene now felt like a journey into the unknown. When he pulled up to the farmhouse, he could see that all the lights were off. Crawford was apparently asleep, unaware of the midnight meeting about to take place on his property. David walked slowly toward the barn, every shadow seeming to hide a potential threat. The moon was almost full, casting an eerie silver light over the landscape. As he approached the barn doors, he could feel his hands shaking. "Thompson." The voice came from inside the barn, and David's blood ran cold. He recognized it as the same muffled voice from the phone calls. "I'm here," David called out. "Show yourself. Come inside. Alone." David pushed open the barn doors and stepped into the dim interior. For a moment he couldn't see anyone, and then a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was a man he'd never seen before, thin, unshaven, with wild eyes that spoke of desperation and too much alcohol. "You must be Marcus Webb," David said. The man laughed, a sound without humor. "So you figured it out?" "Yeah, I'm Marcus Webb. And I'm the one who's been calling you. What do you want?" "I want to tell you the truth about your precious wife before you get yourself killed looking for it." David felt his anger rising. What truth? The truth about what Linda was really doing. The truth about why she died. Marcus walked over to a hay bale and sat down heavily, as if the weight of what he was about to reveal was too much to bear standing up. "Your wife wasn't having an affair with James Harrison, Thompson. She was blackmailing him." David stared at him in shock. "What?" "Linda found out that Harrison was embezzling money from his investment clients. Instead of turning him in, she decided to make a profit from it. She'd been bleeding him dry for months." "That's impossible. Linda would never." "Wake up, Thompson," Marcus shouted. "Your wife was a grifter, a con artist. She married you for your money, just like she married me for mine." David felt the world spinning around him. "You were married to Linda?" "Oh yeah. Before she became Linda Thompson, she was Linda Webb. We were married for 3 years before she cleaned out my bank account and disappeared." David sank down onto another hay bale, the full implications of what he was hearing washing over him. "When I saw her picture in the Austin paper as Linda Thompson, loving wife of successful financial consultant David Thompson, I knew she'd found her next mark. But I also knew she'd eventually move on, just like she did with me. But why kill her? If she was leaving anyway, because she wasn't planning to leave, Thompson. She was planning to kill you." David's blood ran cold. "What?" Marcus reached into his jacket and David tensed. But the man only pulled out a flask and took a long drink. "Linda called me a few weeks ago, said she had a proposition. She wanted me to kill you and make it look like a robbery gone wrong. In exchange, she'd split the insurance money with me." David felt sick. "I don't believe you. She had it all planned out. She was going to call you to meet her here, and I was going to be waiting. But something went wrong." "What went wrong?" Marcus took another drink from his flask. "You didn't show up. I was hiding in here waiting for you, and she came bursting through that door wanting to know where you were. When I told her you weren't coming, she got furious. Said the plan was ruined." David listened with growing horror as Marcus continued. "She started yelling at me, calling me useless, saying she'd find another way to get rid of you. That's when I realized she didn't care about me at all. She was just using me like she'd used everyone else." "So you killed her?" Marcus's face twisted with anguish. "I didn't mean to. I brought the gun to kill you, but when she started laughing at me, telling me I was pathetic and that she'd never loved me, I just snapped." David felt a mixture of relief and revulsion. Relief that he finally knew the truth. Revulsion at what Linda had really been. "Why are you telling me this?" David asked. "Because I'm dying," Marcus said simply. "Liver cancer. Got maybe a month left. And because I want you to know that you weren't the target. You were just another mark." David looked at this broken man and felt an unexpected surge of pity. "Marcus, you need to turn yourself in. Tell the police what really happened." Marcus laughed bitterly. "What's the point? I'm dead anyway. But I wanted you to know the truth before I go. The police think I killed her. They'll keep investigating." "No, they won't. Not after tonight." David felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Marcus stood up unsteadily and David saw that he had a gun in his hand. "I'm sorry, Thompson. I really am. But I can't let you leave here." "Marcus, you don't have to do this. Just tell the police. I can't go to prison. I won't die in a cage like an animal." David realized with growing terror that Marcus Webb was completely unstable. The combination of alcohol, terminal illness, and guilt had pushed him over the edge. "Marcus, think about this. If you kill me, you'll be no better than Linda. Maybe I'm not better than her. Maybe I never was." David heard a car engine in the distance and his heart leaped with hope. But Marcus heard it too and his face darkened. You brought someone with you. No, I came alone, just like you said. The car doors slammed and David heard a familiar voice calling his name. David! David, are you in there? Are you okay? It was Sarah. Despite his instructions, she had followed him to the farm. Before David could warn her, Sarah burst into the barn only to stop short when she saw Marcus pointing his gun at David. So you did bring a friend along after all, Marcus said with a chilling smile. And a pretty one too. I guess I've got two of you to take care of now. He gave Sarah a long look and smiled. But first, I'm going to have a little fun with you. It's been a long time since I've had a woman. No! Sarah screamed, and tears began to run down her face. Stay away from me. Marcus ignored her, tucking his pistol into his belt and beginning to advance on Sarah. David suddenly remembered what had happened to Sarah's mother and felt sick with dread. She must be reliving her worst nightmare. Get away from her, he yelled, but Marcus ignored him. Then, as David watched in horror, he realized that something looked different about Sarah's expression. That wasn't fear. That was rage as Marcus reached for her. He said in a loud voice, I'm going to enjoy this. To Marcus and David's amazement, Sarah screamed out, Not this time! She reached behind her, yanked out a small revolver, and pulled the trigger. The bullet fired at such close range caught Marcus in his midsection and doubled him over. He stumbled backward, fell flat on his back, and lay groaning on the straw-covered dirt. Sarah stared at the writhing figure for a moment, then ran to David and knelt beside him, crying as she hugged and kissed him. Are you all right, David? She asked frantically. My head hurts like hell, he told her. But I think I'll be okay. Thank God you're all right. Can you help me get my hands free? As she tugged at his bonds, they heard another voice yelling, Sarah! Sarah, are you in there? Are you okay? They looked up to see a woman holding her pistol in the two-handed weaver position come through the barn door. Rebecca! Sarah screamed, and the two sisters ran to each other and embraced, crying in their relief. When they had calmed down somewhat, Sarah asked, How did you get here? Rebecca held her tightly. When I got your voicemail, I drove down from Dallas in a police cruiser with the siren on the whole way. I told you I'd never let anything happen to you. As Sarah hugged her in gratitude, Rebecca looked suspiciously at David and Marcus on the floor of the barn. What did David do to you? And who's that other guy? Oh God, I forgot about David, Sarah cried, tugging on her sister's arm. She pulled her toward him. Help me untie him. As the two women struggled with the ropes, David saw motion from the body lying on the barn floor and cried out, That's Marcus Webb over there. He has a gun in his belt. Rebecca quickly moved to the prone figure and rolled him over to find the pistol still tucked in his waistband. She grabbed it and tucked it in her belt. As she did so, Marcus gave a terrible cry. Rebecca rolled him back over and checked his wound. Then she grabbed her phone and called 911, ordering an ambulance and backup. When she returned to David's side, he told her, I think if you run a ballistics check on the pistol you just took, you'll find it matches the one that killed Linda. Rebecca looked at David and then at Sarah. So this guy was the one behind all this? David nodded. And from what he said, I don't think he and Linda were ever legally divorced. He glanced over at Marcus and noticed how pale he had grown. How's he doing? He asked Rebecca in a quiet voice. He's bleeding heavily, she said. There's not much I can do for a bullet wound in the stomach. I don't think he'll last till the EMTs get here. Sarah gave a little whimper at that, and Rebecca reached over to hug her. It's all right, Sarah. You did what you had to do. I'm proud of you. David gave Sarah a puzzled look. I didn't know you even had a gun. Where did that come from? Sarah gave an embarrassed shrug. Rebecca gave it to me years ago after what happened to Mama. I've always hated guns, but Rebecca insisted I keep it with me for protection. I've had it in my purse all these years, but this is the first time I've ever fired it." Just then Marcus Webb groaned again. The three of them moved over to kneel beside him, and Marcus opened his eyes. Seeing David, he spoke in a gasping voice. "I lied to you, man. It wasn't an accident when she came into the barn and saw you weren't here. She got angry. I begged her to forget the plan and go away with me. That's when she told me she didn't love me and that she would never take me back. Then she laughed at me, and I shot her." David, Sarah, and Rebecca exchanged glances. Marcus's voice was noticeably weaker. David glanced down and saw that the effort to talk had forced more blood out of the wound in the man's stomach. Then, to their amazement, Marcus began to laugh. "You can't get away from me now, Linda. This time I know where you've gone, and you better get ready, 'cause I'm going there too." He laughed once more, and then his head dropped back to the dirt and his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Rebecca reached over and felt for his carotid artery. Then she shook her head and closed the dead man's eyelids. While they waited for the EMTs and the police, David managed to recount everything Marcus had revealed about what really happened, and Rebecca added details on what her research had uncovered. Later, when the medical technicians arrived and decided to take David to the hospital for observation, Sarah insisted on following him in her car. Rebecca volunteered to stay and give the police the whole story. After David was strapped to a gurney for the ambulance ride to Austin, Sarah came over and kissed him before heading to her car to follow him. Then Rebecca came over and patted his arm. "I owe you an apology, David," Rebecca said. "I was convinced that you were a sociopath. I thought you'd murdered Linda and were likely to try the same with Sarah. Now it turns out that Linda was the real sociopath and her ex-husband was her killer. I'm sorry I doubted you." David smiled at her. "No problem, Rebecca. I understand." She looked at him solemnly. "Just don't you ever do anything to hurt my little sister." David glanced over at the attendant loading Marcus Webb's body into the other ambulance, then looked back up at Rebecca and shook his head. He smiled and said, "I wouldn't dare." Thank you for your viewing. See you next time. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.